Okay, hi everyone. I'm just going to give it 2 more minutes and then we're going to start. I'm going to post the YouTube streaming link to Are You Connected as well, if people want to watch on YouTube rather. Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for the hello message. Very sweet. Hope everyone's having a good Tuesday. I'm in East London at the moment and it's raining and miserable and everything smells bad. But anyway. So with that, I'm going to get started. Sure. Volume, brightness, everything is up so I can see. All right. So hi, everyone. Today we are going to be doing the forebrain. I had to use my forebrain to think of that. And we're going to basically see how that's split into 2 parts, the diencephalon and the telencephalon or cephalon. Still not sure on the enunciation of that, but anyway. So without further ado, I'm going to get us started. Remember, you can always ask questions in the chat or you can raise your hand and ask and I will get to you. I'm just going to make sure that I can see the chat now. And I'm going to start recording. Okay, and I'm going to put the chat in the bottom corner of my screen. Nice. Let's get started. So today we're going to be doing the forebrain. This is Mabel. This is my friend Dagon's cat. Let me just resume the share so you can see beautiful Mabel and see the same thing as me. And the forebrain, as I just mentioned, is divided into the diencephalon and the telencephalon. However you want to pronounce that, fine with me. And let's look at what we're going to be doing today. So within the diencephalon is the hypothalamus and the thalamus. Those are the ones we're going to be looking at. And then in the telencephalon, we have the cerebral cortex, which is broken up into 4 parts. We're going to look at 2 of them specifically. Then the basal ganglia, and then finally the limbic system. Okay, this is quite an interesting one, and you're going to see why now. So basically the forebrain is most of the brain that we're using every single day. It's 80% of the human brain, and it's all the stuff that's like thoughts and feelings and regulation and helping us to survive beyond just being able to breathe and sleep and eat. And it kind of helps us to do all of those basic things as well. It kind of triggers us to do those things and gives us a drive to carry on surviving. Okay. I've said here it's the most anterior and prominent part of the brain with two cerebral hemispheres, which are known as the cerebrum. Okay. So it's that weird, squishy, folded part that we always associate with when we think about the brain. You can see it's the forebrain. We're going to be looking at all these structures today: the basal ganglia, the thalamus, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and the cerebral cortex. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to get started. Remember, you can put a message in the chat if you need anything. Always here to help. Okay, so with the diencephalon, we're going to start off looking at the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is over here. Okay, it's located between the pituitary gland, which is over here, and the thalamus. Okay, we've already learned about the thalamus. The hypothalamus's job is basically just to keep everything in balance. Homeostasis in biology, if anyone's ever done that subject before in first year, I mean, most of you are in first year if you've done cell bio or zoology in the second semester, or if you did bio during school, you would have heard of homeostasis. Homeostasis basically means everything's balanced out. Okay, you'll see here, maintains the body at a balanced level. This diagram is quite helpful because it kind of breaks down everything that we need. Okay, I've said here that basically the hypothalamus acts as a connector to the endocrine system. The endocrine system basically has to do with hormones. So all the hormones that play a role in human development, whether they be sex hormones, growth hormones, anything else, those kinds of things, these are all connected to the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus kind of regulates it. So they say, okay, you know what? I need a little bit more estrogen from all of you. Like, give it to me. And then your body will do the things, make extra estrogen, release extra estrogen, and then that is regulated. And then when that needs to stop, the hypothalamus will be like, okay, pump the brakes. We're all sorted now. On to the next thing. Okay. The hypothalamus is then also involved in stress responses because it can trigger cortisol release. Now, cortisol we spoke about yesterday, actually, funnily enough, and cortisol is what is released into our body when we are stressed. I mentioned the book, The Body Keeps the Score. What that basically speaks about is the fact that when we release cortisol, it is very, very hard for our body to once again break it down. Other hormones and stuff will pee it out, will get it absorbed back into something as it functions, all of that stuff. But cortisol is quite a tricky little bugger because it stays stored in our body a lot more. And what people have realized now is that cortisol is not good for us. It literally, it can wreak havoc on your immune system. It makes you feel a little bit more stressed all the time. I don't know, it's bad for you. And the thing about cortisol is because it's so hard to get rid of, it sticks around and, like I said, wreaks havoc and stuff. And that's why the book, The Body Keeps the Score, basically talks about the fact that we should not always be in high stress environments. We should not always be under distress. That's why anxiety is such a valid disorder that people need to get treated for and stuff like that. It's not just all in your head, because that stress sticks with your body and actually causes physical side effects. Okay. So again, the hypothalamus is going to be triggered when stress responses need to take place. So if you remember from yesterday when we were talking about the peripheral nervous system, the peripheral nervous system is going to listen a lot of the time to the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is kind of calling the shots there. Okay, I then listed there at the bottom all the different things that the hypothalamus may be involved in. Okay, so body temperature, so it can help regulate our body temperature, feelings of thirst and appetite, emotions, sleep cycles, sex drive, childbirth, blood pressure and heart rate, production of digestive juices, and balancing body fluids. Okay, so a lot of important things there. Obviously, we need all of those things, so it's important that our hypothalamus is working. Okay, And then I just highlighted 2 regions of the hypothalamus, or rather Mr. Zondo did, and I just used them. And the ones that he highlighted was temperature regulation takes place where there are thermosensitive neurons. Don't worry if that sounds a little bit big and wordy. Thermo in biology always means it relates to temperature. And sensitive obviously means that if something changes with the thermo part, it's going to have an effect. So thermosensitive, regulating temperature, and the neurons within the hypothalamus are going to be in charge of that. And then the apostat center is in charge of feeding. And you can see here they did an experiment where they took a rat, a sister rat and a rat, and they basically put a lesion. It says here the ventromedial hypothalamus of the rat on the right was damaged on purpose because this was an experiment, animal testing, all that stuff. And her body weight was monitored for a year. And yeah, we can see what happens. So this is the sister rat. This was fine. And since this was damaged, the VMH, the ventromedial hypothalamus, so that's where the apostat center is, since that was damaged, the rat couldn't really control its food intake as well as its body weight. And that's why you can see she's a bit of a chunk. Okay. I need a cough. Okay, it's not corona. It's just poor air quality in East London. Don't come to East London. Anyway, the thalamus is what we're going to move on to next. But before I do that, just to clarify, hypothalamus, it's always involved in regulation. So all the things that need to be regulated in our body: temperature, food, drink, sex, heart rate, those kinds of things. Anything that needs careful checking, and you can't just leave it to do its own thing. It needs to be checked, brought down, brought back up, kind of changes. Hypothalamus is your boy. Okay. The thalamus then is a gateway for channeling sensory information to the visual, auditory cortexes, and the frontal lobes. We're going to talk about those just now, but they're basically like a little gateway, kind of like directs everything to where it needs to go. So here we can see the hypothalamus, which is what we just spoke about, the pituitary stalk, the pituitary gland over there. And then this little part here, that bigger section, that's the thalamus. Okay. And then it has little signals going off. One of them goes to the auditory cortex. The other one goes to the visual cortex. And then those are all going to the frontal lobe. Okay. Alrighty. Done with the diencephalon. Cool. Now we're moving on to this one. So the telencephalon is made up of a bunch of different things, but it's mostly just the meaty boys over here. Okay. The cerebral cortex. It's basically all this stuff over here. So the frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the parietal lobe. Okay. So there are 4 lobes, and each of them have like a basic function, but I put all the functions here because I just find this kind of stuff fascinating, the way that like one part of my brain does one thing, like most of the time. So the occipital, visual information. So it says, yeah, vision and integrating visual information, color, shape, distance. Obviously that's important because once we see something, we then need something to process what we're seeing. Otherwise it's literally like staring at nothing. We might as well be doing that. Okay. The frontal lobe is finer movement and speech production. It also has Broca's area there. So let's see what's in the frontal lobe. Planning, reasoning, problem solving, morality, personality, social skills, recognizing and regulating emotions, motor functions, motor speech area of the Broca. That's all there. So the ones that we highlighted here is the main functions: speech, Broca's area, and fine movement. So you see there motor and motor. Okay. What is so significant about Broca's area? I'll talk about that just now. Someone's also asking for the YouTube link yesterday. I didn't stream to YouTube. There weren't enough people, so I just left it. But the recording is on Are You Connected? Yes, okay, I've just done the frontal lobe and the occipital. The temporal lobe, this is now speech comprehension. We're going to talk about Broca's area and Wernicke's area in like literally a split second. But basically comprehension, so understanding, language, hearing, speech. Oh, they spelled speech wrong. That's embarrassing. Memory, learning, sensory speech area of Wernicke. Okay? So basically this is speech production. So your mouth and your vocal cords physically moving to make things happen. And the temporal is understanding and then being able to talk it out. Okay, so here, temporal's understanding. Over here, basically understanding. And then frontal lobe is like then making it happen once it's understood. So you can see how much these things all work together. The parietal lobe then is your orientation in space. So it's recognizing sensation, your body position, objects, your sense of time and space, reading and comprehension, association between functions of other lobes. Okay, so mainly the parietal lobe is orientation in space. So it's these things, recognizing sensation, body position, object, sense of time and space. So it's literally the part of your brain that's like, Emma, right now you are sitting on a couch. You are in East London. You are on a balcony. What else? I feel a bit cold on my arms because it's a bit cold. All of those things. That's what your parietal lobe is doing. Okay. If I don't do almost or more than half of the things in the frontal lobe, is my brain affected? I don't know what you mean by that, because you're doing all of those things now just by being in this lecture. You're planning, you're reasoning, you're problem solving. You have some sense of morality, personality, social skills, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Obviously, there can be disorders, and we'll talk about those, how a personality disorder they think might be linked to some damage in the frontal lobe. There's a very famous case of a man named Phineas Gage, if you've ever heard of him. I'd suggest you look that up. It's a very, very interesting case for all you little budding psychologists. And basically, he had frontal lobe damage, and I think it was frontal lobe damage. And his personality changed, and he became super aggressive and all of that stuff. Very interesting. Yeah, and then planning, reasoning, problem solving. So we're doing all of those things all the time, even if you don't even realize it. And you might not be good at all those things, but that's probably linked to something else. Like maybe you have a concentration problem. Maybe you're not interested in the subject, which I will take personally. Yeah, you're doing all those things. You're not doing all those things. Otherwise, you wouldn't be at university. How does paranoia fit in here? So paranoia is a perceived threat that isn't there, or like a perceived future threat that isn't going to happen. That would probably come with planning and reasoning. So again, it's a frontal lobe issue. Okay, parietal maybe as well, if you're having hallucinations, if we're taking paranoia further to a disorder like schizophrenia, there might be problems in the parietal lobe. It's very, very difficult for us to understand what's happening in the brain with all of those disorders. We have vague ideas, but for the most part, it's a bit unknown. Even with well-documented things like ADHD and depression and stuff that like are more common than schizophrenia and the rest, there's still a lot of unanswered questions. Okay. What do you mean sense of time? So sense of time is knowing that right now it's 4:20, which means I'm in the afternoon, which means soon I need to eat supper, and a little bit after that I should go and watch Catfish, and then a little bit after that I should FaceTime my friend, and then after that I should go to bed. It's that, like basically just knowing where you're at in the day, what needs to happen, and what has happened. Okay, it's basically, yeah, orientation. Orientation always means, like, remember O week, first years, basically orientates you, lets you know where things are, what your space is in the university, what your roles are. Kind of just fits you into the puzzle piece. Okay, this is fitting you into the puzzle piece that is the universe. Okay. So now to get a little bit more detailed with each of these things, I want to look at the frontal lobe. Okay, the frontal lobe is the largest lobe. We can see it's over here. Chink, quite big. Okay, it has a right and left hemisphere. Okay, it does have that longitudinal fissure, is what it's called, where it divides in the middle, literally where my path is at the moment. And you can see there's those key areas that I've mentioned here: the premotor, motor, prefrontal, and Broca's area. Okay. Its main roles are motor function and planning movements, as well as thinking, feeling, imagining, making decisions. It might seem like I'm just dismissing those things, but these things are actually huge. Like planning movement and motor function is like 99% of like us moving our little meat suits around and going about our day. The thinking, feeling, imagining, making decisions, that's like on top of the other stuff. We can't do any of those things if we aren't out and about in the world, moving and shaking and doing things. So that's why I say that the main role is motor function and planning movements, as well as auxiliary to this, thinking, feeling, imagining, making decisions, all of that stuff. Personality also there. Okay. Frontal lobes. Now, we've just been speaking about this. And remember, we said there's Broca's area. It's over here, looking at the bottom of the frontal lobe. Okay. It's on the left hemisphere. So on the left side of the brain, over here-ish. Okay. It's involved in speech production, not comprehension. Remember, comprehension is the temporal lobe. And in the frontal lobe, specifically in the Broca's area, is speech production. So making my mouth move, making my vocal cords do its thing, all of that stuff. That is the Broca's area. We're now going to talk about something called Broca's aphasia, which is when your Broca's area is damaged for some reason. Okay, traumatic brain injury, anything like that. Okay, so just to recap, Broca's area, frontal lobes, they're involved in speech production, which means they move your muscles for speech, and they make our speech clear and fluent, okay, so that other people can understand us. If there's destruction to it, so something has happened to your Broca's area, okay, we see something called expressive aphasia, where you know what you want to say, because again, what you want to say is decided in your temporal lobe, but then it doesn't quite come out the way you want it to. So we see broken speech, we'll see stuttering, we'll see stopping and starting, we'll see ums and uhs and all of that stuff. Mr. Zondo included this test for Broca's aphasia in his slides last year, and I thought it was quite cool. If you read here, it doesn't really make like comprehensive sense. So you can see what the person's trying to say. They're trying to like explain what's going on, but like there's a lot of mistakes, and you can see there's some stuttering. The that's stuttering as well. Remember, stuttering is not just a, you know, it's also and stuff like that. That's also a form of stuttering. Stopping and starting, you can see there's pauses. Yeah, and just disordered speech basically is Broca's aphasia. Okay. Someone's asking, what's happening to the frontal lobe during sleep paralysis? So sleep paralysis is basically when we are sleeping and when we're in our REM cycle, our brain tells all those motor things to switch off basically, and just, it's like, don't move. We're sleeping now. Don't care what the dream is telling you, don't move. Okay. So the frontal lobes aren't being activated in that motor sense, and all our other things that are involved in motor stuff. Okay, mostly the frontal lobe. So frontal lobe's just chilling. But at the same time, the frontal lobe is in charge of very abstract things too, like dreaming. So those parts of the frontal lobes will be activated. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Sleep paralysis is very poorly understood because it's quite an odd one. But for anyone who doesn't know what sleep paralysis is, it's basically when you're sleeping and then you wake up, but you can't move. And then often that's accompanied by like very distressing imagery and stuff like that, because you're still in a dream state. So then you kind of hallucinate and see things that aren't there and stuff like that. So it can be quite terrifying. Okay. Now, spoken about the frontal lobes. Now we're talking about the temporal lobes. So remember, frontal is speech production. Temporal is speech comprehension. Again, also on the left hemisphere. Okay, so can you see a problem? If the left side of your brain is damaged in some way, can you see how that's going to cause a problem for both speech comprehension and production? And why it's important for us to differentiate between the two, because maybe that can help us figure out what part of the brain is damaged. Because then, for example, if you are the neuropsych on call and someone comes in with a brain injury and they're like, we don't know what's wrong, we can't do a brain scan, he's got a metal plate in his head and it's going to rip through his skull or whatever, you know, there's sometimes those dramatic moments on TV. You can then say to them, okay, here's a picture, tell me what's happening. And then based on their responses, you can tell if it's Broca's area or Wernicke's area that's been affected. And then from there, you can kind of tell if it's the temporal lobe, if it's Wernicke's area, or the frontal lobe, if it's Broca's area. Okay, someone's asking, so people with bipolar disorder, what is wrong with their frontal lobe? I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think we are talking about bipolar disorder later on. But bipolar disorder, basically, it has to do more with hormones and, well, not hormones, neurotransmitters and like misfiring with that. So that's kind of the main thing. And then we'll see how that affects different parts of the brain as well. Since bipolar is a mood disorder, it isn't as closely linked to the temporal, not to the temporal, to the frontal lobe. It's more, actually, I can't say that I can't say that with conviction. I'm not sure. But bipolar, we need to remember, is a mood disorder. Something like borderline is a personality disorder. So that's going to have something to do with frontal lobes. Okay. Is stuttering only a result of damage to the Broca area? Are there other causes as well? Stuttering can also be a result of trauma. Trauma can also cause people to stutter and other things as well. But as far as I'm aware, stuttering, it's basically the fact that your speech production is being halted. And since speech production has to do with Broca's area, that's probably the main cause. Okay. So what happens when Wernicke's area is now messed up in some way? So you've got a brain injury. It's called fluent aphasia. Here it's expressive aphasia because you want to express yourself, but you can't, but you know what you want to say. Here it's fluent, but meaningless. So you're saying all the right things, but not in a way that it makes any sense. Okay, so here where you can see what they're trying to say, but it's not being expressed really well. Here you can't really tell what they're saying, but it is expressed in the correct way. So mother is away here working her work to get her better, but when she's looking, the two boys looking in the other part, she's working another town. That doesn't make sense. Okay, even though it's following grammatical sense and stuff like that to a degree, it's not making any sense to us at all. Okay, so can you see the difference there? So Broca's area, you know what you want to say, but you're not expressing it well. And then Wernicke's area, you're expressing yourself in the right way, but it's meaningless. Okay, so there aren't stutters or starts or stops. So they speak very, very confidently, but it's gibberish. Like it just does not make sense. I'm trying to think of an example. It's kind of like that TikTok where they have like people talking like in sim language, if you've ever played the Sims, and it sounds like they're saying a sentence, but you don't understand what's going on. Okay. It's almost like listening to someone speaking an entirely different language. And you can tell they know what's going on. They're talking just fine, no stuttering or anything. They're just having a normal chat. But to you, they're making zero sense. In Wernicke's aphasia, that's happening, but they're clearly speaking English or whatever language you are assessing them in. Okay, so this difference is quite an important one. So please do take note of it. So Broca's aphasia, it's expressive. Wernicke's area, it's fluent. Or Wernicke's aphasia, it's fluent. Okay, we're now moving on from those lobes, and now we're looking at the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia is the weird, meaty, alien-looking boy in the middle. Okay, I don't like it. It's not the vibe. Like, do you know when you see something and you instantly get a bad energy from it? I somehow get that from the basal ganglia. Okay, it's that middle thing over there. It's basically a collection of nuclei just below the white matter of the cortex. Okay, and you call it a boy. That wasn't on purpose. I don't have anything against men. Okay, but basically it's a collection of nuclei just below the white matter of the cortex. So the cortex is always inside in bio. It's like the inside stuff. So just below this, we'll see our basal ganglia. The three principal structures that are involved in it are the chordate nucleus, which is over here. Okay. The putamen, which is this. And then the globus pallidus, which are these things. Okay. So take note of those three principal structures that make up the basal ganglia. They all together, so all three of those things, the chordate nucleus, the putamen, and the globus pallidus, form a motor loop with the motor area in the frontal lobes. So remember, we were just talking about motor stuff and everything. The things that are happening here also have something to do with the basal ganglia. So they form a loop. So they're constantly in chats with each other. Okay. So we can't talk about the motor function of the frontal lobes without talking about the basal ganglia. Okay. So it's the same as how the peripheral nervous system, which has a lot of hormones and let's rather call them neurotransmitters and stuff, they obviously need to work very closely with our hypothalamus. So can we see brain, very interconnected. Okay. So the basal ganglia's main function is fluid movement or goal movement, voluntary movement, any of those things. It basically means like you are coordinated, like you're not just happening to move. It's literally like I'm thinking to myself right now, okay, I'm going to lift my hand and wave and then put my hand down. So it's that fluid choreographed movement. The best example they always used is choreographed dancing. Okay, so a ballerina, you'll see the basal ganglia lighting up like a Christmas tree when this is going on. Okay, the goal of all movement is to be fluid and target orientated. If you're an awkward person like I am, your movement isn't always fluid, but for survival's sake and just for like less mishaps and clumsiness sake, we want our movement to be fluid and target orientated. So there's a meaning behind our movement. I'm not just moving for the sake of it. Okay. To achieve this, the motor and sensory association areas in our brain. Okay. So motor, remember, is the frontal lobe, and sensory association, that's going to be mostly the parietal lobe. They're going to send information to the basal ganglia, which is basically here if I drilled a hole in my skull to the middle, to execute a particular movement. So this part will be like, all right, arms got to move. And this part's going to be like, because I want to wave, or because I need to swat a fly away from my face because I can feel a fly on my face. They will all go to the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia will be like, aces, brothers, let's do it. And then you will swat the fly away from your face or whatever. Okay. Disorders in the basal ganglia, for some reason, are quite common. For example, Tourette's syndrome. I was teaching my grade 11 and 12 chemistry class about this the other day, but Tourette's is actually not so cut and dry as what we see it on TikTok. Okay, it's like even if you blink a lot, okay, and you don't know why, but you're blinking a lot, especially when you're nervous, that's a form of a tic. Okay, a tic is what makes up a Tourette's syndrome. It means that you have uncontrollable tics. So if you blink a lot, that could be a tic. Okay, Tourette's syndrome, it also, there's impulsivity issues. So your frontal lobe is like, we have to say something, so we're going to move the mouth and the vocal cord. And then the parietal lobe is like, okay, cool, I don't see a problem with that, because the basal ganglia is sending out the wrong vibes. And then basically the wrong thing will come out, or an inappropriate thing, or whatever. Tourette's is quite complicated and complex as well. I don't know if complicated and complex are quite similar things. But yeah, basically it's quite a complex thing, but to bore it down to its basic details, there's a problem with the basal ganglia because motor information and sensory association information is being sent there and it's not being executed correctly. I see Peter has his hand raised.
Do reflexes go through the basal ganglia, or do we just not think about when? Yeah.
So reflexes can go through the basal ganglia, but reflexes are normally on a motor sensory loop thingy thing. I can't remember the correct term, but it's basically the fact that your brain is connected to your spinal cord means that your brain can send shortcuts basically. And then instead of me needing to do some kind of reflex and sending the message all the way up to my brain and then all the way back down to my finger or whatever it is, it will just send it to its closest, basically like spinal cord checkpoint, and then back again. So it like creates a shorter feedback loop. If someone can remember that term, it's in grade 11 or 12 bio. I can't for the life of me remember it, but that's basically what happens there with reflex arch. Thank you, Angel. You quite literally are an angel. Your reflex arch. So basically impulse up to your spinal cord, wherever's closest, checkpoint, back again. That's your reflex arch. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. And thank you, Angel. Okay. I've got a question. Is the brain also controlled by the neurons in order for a person to do an action? Yes. So neurons we're going to talk about just now. Well, not just now, next lecture or so. But neurons are basically the things that make up the brain. Okay. So all these meaty, juicy parts of the brain are literally millions and millions of neurons all connected to each other and sending signals. So when I talk about a signal being sent from here to the wherever, those are neurons that are doing that. So yes, the brain is controlled by neurons. The brain is made up of neurons. I hope that answers your question. Yes, okay. And then obviously then in a reflex arch, those motor neurons just go shoop, shoop quickly like that. All right. The limbic system. Okay, the limbic system is here-ish, as far as I'm aware. And it's a group of structures between the neocortex, which is this stuff, and the brainstem, which is this stuff. Okay. Its principal structures are the amygdala. Oh, here it is. It starts there, but it goes all the way down here. Are the amygdala and the hippocampus. See them here. Okay. The amygdala is emotions and fear. So it's basically the vibes. Okay. The amygdala sorts out the vibes. Okay. You can see obviously emotions was also in our frontal lobe. So again, that interconnectedness key. Okay. Then the hippocampus is memory. So if you can't forget your ex, it's your hippocampus that you have to blame. Okay. Trying to think what else I can say about this. But basically, yeah, the limbic system gets very, very complicated with the amygdala and the hippocampus. So for now, I'm just happy with you guys knowing that the amygdala is emotions and fear. The hippocampus is memory, and I'm sure it will pop up again in future lectures. Okay, case study. There is a case of someone named Henry Molaison. Not sure how you say it. And that has something to do with the limbic system going wrong. I'm going to look after this when I upload this recording to Are You Connected and see if there's a video on there of Henry Molaison. And you can have a look at that and try and figure out what part of the brain is being affected in this case. Okay, and what's going wrong. Okay, remember, if something's going wrong, it means that that part of the brain is affected. There's maybe a tumor growing on it. It's maybe damaged. Yeah, anything basically that would stop it from functioning normally or sending signals or receiving signals from other parts of the brain. Okay. And with that, we're done. These are my friend Dagan's other pets. He said they don't have names, which I thought was quite rude. So I've named them Stephen and Jeremy. And if anyone has any questions, you want me to go back to something, re-explain anything, feel free to. Okay. We finished on time today, which is really has made my day. So if anyone has any questions or something they want to clarify, which one is Stephen? Why would you ask me that, Peter? I feel like the duck is more of a Jeremy. So by process of elimination, the bird is Stephen. Also, when I looked at them, I was like Stephen, Jeremy. So yeah, so Stephen the bird and Jeremy the duck. Anyone else got any questions? In what part of the brain is the basal ganglia found? Okay, so let's go back to the basal ganglia. So it's part of the telencephalon. Okay, is it? Yes. And it's basically behind over there. If you cut a brain in half, you can see it much better. It's kind of hidden by the temporal lobe on the side. But basically, if I had to look in the middle there, like if I had to take the brains and split it in half and look there, that would be where I found my basal ganglia. Okay. It's just kind of like hidden in the middle, like a precious, precious surprise, or like a Kinder Joy. Okay, why not Tony? I don't know, maybe next time there'll be a Tony. Oh, like that guy yells at his duck and the duck's name is Tony. I don't know, I don't like those videos. I get stressed out when I hear people yelling. So I always feel like I'm the duck. Why not Franklin? Guys, I don't know. I don't have all the answers. Okay, I don't even know how to pronounce telencephalon. So like, you guys are asking too much of me, quite honestly. Okay, what happens when there's a blockage in the basal ganglia? Okay, so obviously basal ganglia, it's dealing with fluid movement. So there's going to be problems with fluid movement. If anyone's ever watched House, the one character on the Olivia Wilde's character, she had Huntington's disease. And I'm sure Huntington's disease has something to do with the basal ganglia. Let me look. I was correct. You can't see, but it's involved in the chordate nucleus and the putamen. So basically what Huntington's disease is, you can go look it up. Huntington's disease, spelled just as you would say it, is like movement becomes broken up. So either there'll be like jerky movements and then eventually paralysis. Okay. Can I explain the thalamus again? Sure thing, chicken wing. Thalamus. Okay. So the thalamus, it's in the middle-ish there. Okay. It's part of the diencephalon, so it works with the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. And it kind of acts as like a gateway. So I always think of it as like a checkpoint or like a rest stop or like a train station type thing where all the trains go. Okay. It will channel sensory information to the visual cortex. So if a sensory thing is picked up, it will send it to the visual cortex, the auditory cortex, and the frontal lobes. Okay, so it's basically just like a little like helps things. Google keeps telling me the basal ganglia is located in the diencephalon. Let me look up. In which case, I'll need to correct Mr. Zondo's slides as well and get back to you. Okay, so the subthalamic nucleus, which forms part of the basal ganglia. So going back to basal ganglia, that part is in the diencephalon, but mostly the basal ganglia is within the telencephalon. Okay, it's very strongly interconnected to both. So you don't need to learn it per se that it is in one or the other. I just broke them up because it's easier to kind of split them in between. But yeah, what pages in the textbook can I find the work covered today? I will double check and put that on the group and on Are You Connected for you. Okay, Tourette's syndrome, what did you say it was again? So Tourette's syndrome is basically uncontrolled, like you can't control things that you say or like motor things that you do. So like blinking or like a twitch or something like that. All of those things are tics, as well as saying things that maybe you shouldn't say or inappropriate or making a strange sound. Those are all Tourette's. It's basically called a tic. A tic is something strange that your body just does and you don't know why it did that. And Tourette's syndrome is basically when you have those tics and you can't control them. Okay. Is deafness associated with the thalamus? So deafness is going to be the auditory cortex. Yes. So the thalamus, if the thalamus is affected and it can't get messages to the auditory cortex, you are correct, then there can be deafness. And on the opposite end then, if I was talking about the temporal lobe, where there's hearing, if the temporal lobe was also damaged, there would also be deafness. So it's always on both sides. So since the thalamus sends messages to the auditory cortex, if the thalamus is damaged, you can cause deafness. But also if the place it needs to go, so the auditory cortex is damaged, yes, then same thing, deafness can occur. Okay. I've got someone saying it's page 162 to 165 in the 4th edition textbook. Thank you so much. I'm sending you so many hugs and kisses, but virtually and never to touch you because firstly, it's inappropriate and secondly, COVID. But thank you so much. Really appreciate that. So page 162 to 165 in the textbook. Really trying to get my brokers and Wernick's area working here. What is the function of the principal structure globus pallidus? I'm going to Google that for you because we didn't really need to know that today, but good question. It controls conscious and proprioceptive movements. So it's basically also involved in movement. Okay. The cerebellum and brainstem are diencephalon. Okay, remember the cerebellum is a completely different thing. I don't have those slides with me, but the cerebellum over here and the brainstem, different thing completely. Remember, it's the hindbrain. Yes, the hindbrain. Or the midbrain, it's the hindbrain. Might be the midbrain. But we're talking about the forebrain today. Diencephalon and telencephalon are within that. So since this isn't the forebrain, then no, it is not. Okay. So does the thalamus send the info to all of the cauteries and the lobe at the same time or only where it needs to go? So the thalamus is kind of just the train station. So comes in and it's like, okay, you go there, you go there, you go there. Obviously, it's all very, very quick and not something we're conscious of. But yeah, it doesn't send it to every single part, only the part that's working at the moment. Two parts might be working because obviously, if you're in a lecture, you're watching me or you're watching the slides and you're listening to me. So it's going to be visual and auditory. So those things will be sent to both of those places. Okay, remember the brain's super interconnected. So literally this is nothing for them to do all those things. Okay. Is the thalamus responsible for imagination? Let's look that up too. So the thalamus, it's actually new research. So cool question. There's growing research that suggests that the thalamus also increases the brain's ability to adapt to new contexts and enabling the use of memory and imagination when deciding how to act. So it's involved in imagination. It's not responsible for imagination. I'd say that the frontal lobe is more involved in that because that's all the abstract stuff. Okay, but the thalamus is apparently, they're looking at it now, involved in memory and imagination and deciding what to do with it. Okay, I'm going to end off the lecture there because we are now 10 minutes past time. Whoopsie. I hope everyone had a good lecture and I will upload these slides next Monday. I don't know if you saw that message on the group, but I decided I will send out slides, but only the following week. So if you want to stay on top of things, you need to watch the recording again or attend lectures. And then when it gets posted again, it should just be revision or clarifying a point or two. Okay, thank you, everyone. I hope you all have good Tuesdays further and that you, I don't know, found joy in things.